Hello, everybody, and welcome. And today we have a very interesting discussion. We have fan favorite Apocrypha here, and we're going to talk about Buddhism and the red pill. But before we get to that, I just wanted to explain the thumbnail to some of you guys. So there's kind of a joke about Apoc. Those of you who've met him in person, like I have, know that he kind of resembles the actor that played Saruman in the Lord of the Rings. So I did some messing with the image, and it does kind of resemble him. And that is why it is that way. So with that out of the way, Apoc, welcome again. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So let's jump right into it, man, because I want to keep this to about 2 hours.
Okay.
So what is Buddhism?
That's a very Buddhist question.
All right. We're on the right track so far.
So it's in the name. The simplest explanation is that Buddha, the word Buddha, or the Sanskrit word Bud, means to be awake or to wake up. And the word Buddha is a title. It's like if you are a Buddha, you're a person who has woken up to the reality of existence. You see things as much as you can, as they really are. So Buddhism is, the ism is sort of is a, as you know, it's sort of the practice of. So ism sort of means to practice in some sense, like a doctor would practice medicine.
Right.
So Buddhism is a method whose purpose is to wake you up to the reality of the world. That's the simplest.
That's a good explanation.
Yeah.
So
it's what it's not. It's not a doctrine. It's not a series of laws. It's not a bunch of prescriptions. And there are many different ways of looking at that process from different cultural vantage points and from different points of view. But in the end, that's what they're all aiming at.
All right. So how did you get into this?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and when I was young, when I was in school, when I was a young teenager, say, I thought I might want to be a priest. And so I started studying Catholic theology, started actually reading Augustine, Jerome, Francis, all the great authors of Catholic theology. I started really looking into it. And what I discovered was that what they were saying was nothing like what I was hearing from the church. If you actually get into it, you realize that a deeply theological view of Catholicism actually sounds a lot like Buddhism, actually. I didn't know that at the time, but so there's a sort of mystical edge to it once you get into actual theology. And so I started asking questions. Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the priests that I talked to weren't really willing to back down on the notion that whatever the church says is correct, period, end of story. You just have to take it on faith and believe it. Even though I would point out that, St. Augustine and other Catholic theologians had questioned things about the church's approach, and the church had changed its approach. I still remember being told, well, you're not St. Augustine.
Right.
And it was very discouraging. they were just trying to put me into a box, and I was having none of it. So um, when I became an adult, I let Catholicism go completely and started looking around for a practice that um, was more in line with what it was I was trying to figure out. I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I was just seeking out what was true, and so that's what I started doing. So I went through a whole period of time, and eventually I came to Buddhism through transcendental meditation. So I started I started meditating. So to back up a little, I'd been sort of accidentally meditating, basic meditation, since I was very young. I just kind of tripped over it by accident when I was a kid. And I'd been doing it from time to time ever since then. And so I thought, well, I should probably get some training, like figure out what this really is. And so I learned Zen, I learned Zazen, and I learned transcendental meditation because I didn't know which one was the right one, you know. And so I went from there. And then I eventually came upon Buddhism in general. First Zen, and then eventually I settled on Tibetan Buddhism, mainly because it's really colorful and I liked all that.
I'm glad you said that because we had a question in the chat asking which version you prefer. So you answered that without us having to bring it up. Nice.
There you go. I wouldn't say I prefer it, but it's the one I settled on because it suited my personality. I like the ritual and all of that. And the advanced practices are very rigorous and very difficult and stretch your capabilities. And I like that too. So it suited me. That being said, there's a lot of Tibetan Buddhist lamas that are, I don't know, I wouldn't say they're grifters, but just, if anyone knows anything about Tibetan Buddhism, I won't get into it, but there's something called guru devotion in Tibetan Buddhism, which I think is, it's a bad idea.
So it's kind of like, getting too attached to, like, say, a red pill content creator.
Sure. Yeah, it's essentially forming a little cult of personality around the guru. Mm-hmm. And if the guru has nothing but your best interests in mind, that's not really a problem. Unfortunately, nobody's perfect, and there can be real problems as a result of that.
Yeah, if their ego comes into play, like
which it always
happens often.
Yeah,
in every community, it becomes a problem with grifters and their egos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you can also not know you're doing it. I mean, I've heard many justifications for it, but I've never heard one that I thought was satisfactory. I mean, I understand what they're saying, but they're presupposing that all gurus are enlightened, and to the point where they can't be. They're basically giving themselves a pass. They're saying, well, these gurus are all obviously enlightened because they've made it this far in the path, but the only evidence I have of that is their credentials from the Tibetan establishment. To be the same thing as sort of, not questioning the words from a professor at all ever. It's a very Eastern way of sort of looking at it, and I don't think it's so good. But anyway, that being said, Tibetan Buddhism is really interesting, colorful, and parochial, and that's why I like it. It's got a lot of art. It's kind of funny that you actually chose the Tibetan mandala to put up on the screen there as a thumbnail.
That's just how it worked out, man.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's how I came to Buddhism. So I kind of tripped over it. I'd known about it for a long time, but I kind of stumbled into it through Zen, and Tibetan Buddhism seemed more reasonable. Zen
Yeah.
seemed a little too ascetic for me.
Okay. Well, real quick, I want to address the chat. Thank you guys for being here. I see you. I don't, I'll put your comments and stuff on the screen at a later time. I just don't want to distract Apoc right now. But there will be time for questions. So if you have questions, hold on to those questions or ask them again when we go into the question and answer phase. But I am watching the chat, so don't feel like I'm like ignoring you or anything like that. And everyone who's here and or was here or is still here, thank you for being here. With that said, Apoc.
Yes.
So next question for you. You
Yes, sir.
said that Buddhism is the ultimate red pill or something along those lines, right?
The
Can
original,
you,
anyway. Yeah.
okay. But now, can you elaborate on that?
Well, if you think about what the red pill is supposed to be, I mean, at least in common parlance from the Matrix movie, um, the red pill is a medicine that you take, and then you wake up to what's real. It's a method. I mean, it's not like they had to keep taking red pills, right?
Yeah, it just took the one and it was
Just the
over.
one,
Yeah.
right? Um, so in that sense, Buddhism, I've said before to me, people have asked me, and I've said, I've been being red pilled slowly my whole life, ever since I um, got involved in Buddhism, because the process of Buddhism is like it's a dialectic. So you do something for a while, and then you question it, you alter what you're doing, and then you do that for a while, and then you question it. And the idea is that eventually you reach some level of understanding. You trip over enlightenment in Buddhism. It's not there's no if there was a real formula, then you could just follow these steps and get there. Buddhism doesn't really work that way. It's different for everyone, and it's a method that works, but it's not a prescriptive method. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So it's more like we're going to start here, and then you're going to practice this for a while, and then you're going to find inconsistencies. So I can give you an example of that.
Sure. Yeah. Shoot.
So a common translation of the second noble truth is that the origin of suffering is craving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which I won't get in. I mean, I can get into this stuff a little more if you want to, but
Yeah. By all means. By all means, dude.
So craving or thirst actually is the origin of quote unquote suffering or bitterness or difficulty, frustration. It's translated lots of ways. Dukkha is translated lots of ways. Anyway, so craving. Okay. So then you receive the instruction, try not to crave. Try to be released from craving, from all craving. And so you go out and you do that for a while. And hopefully what happens to you is that you figure out that you are craving not to crave. And so you hopefully at that point you come back to the teacher and say, well, this is a problem. I'm craving not to crave. How do I get out of this bind? Because it's infinite. And at that point, usually it depends on who you are and how the teacher knows you, but they might say something like, well, the goal is not to crave, to not crave too much. And so you go back and you do that for a while. And then you come back and you say, I have no fucking idea what too much or too little is. I don't have a reference. And this keeps going. So that's why Buddhism is a method and not a doctrine. It's a dialectic and a conversation with reality and not a set of rules that you need to follow.
So, in other words, it's a method that allows you to go your own way. if you will.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Yeah. Well,
Interesting.
and by going your own way, you come into union with everything.
Hmm.
So, what you find out is that by going your own way, you become united with everything. You see everything for what it is, and you realize the connections of everything, that how everything is connected together, light and dark, up and down, what it all means, not from a words point of view or a language point of view, but from an experience. Like, you feel it differently. The world feels different when you have these experiences. When you start doing these practices, the world starts to feel different to you and more clear, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I guess that's part of the whole enlightenment thing, is you see
Yep.
things differently.
That's
So
yeah, exactly. You're not, nothing's changing except for your point of view. Ultimately, it's kind of, I've also said that Buddhism is, in some sense, the ultimate in deprogramming. So you get programmed by your culture and your environment to think a certain way and to talk. We're given these languages. English is particularly egregious this way, but basically, our languages dictate how we think in a lot of ways, because it's how we label everything, how we measure everything is how we label it. And if the language has some assumptions built into it, our thoughts will have those assumptions built in. So in English, you have a noun, you have a subject and an object, right?
yeah.
You have a noun and a verb.
Hmm.
Is anything in the universe static?
I really don't think so, but
Nothing is. Yeah,
right.
nothing is static. At the very least, even if you reduce something to the temperature of absolute zero, it's still moving through time. So nothing is static. Everything is always moving and changing. And so nothing is ever the same thing that it was, just like a wave. And so why the noun? Why do we label? You see what I'm saying? This is a linguistic convenience, so that we can measure things and we're not thinking about, we're just thinking about things as static because it's convenient, right?
Sure.
But things aren't static. Everything is always moving. I could say that you're rifling while I'm apocryphing.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
And it would make perfect sense. You could actually talk in nothing but verbs. It would sound weird, but people would understand you. So, so so the reason I bring that up is that a lot of what Buddhism aims to do is to remove that conditioning and to allow you to adjust your views so you are actually in harmony with what's really going on. That's it. There's no, it's basically amoral. It's not immoral, but it's not, it doesn't, any morality in Buddhism is in some sense incidental.
Yeah, and I see where again, that's another parallel with the red pill, as I know it, is that it's amoral. There's no morality. It's just simply
What is?
the truth. Yes, it
What
is
is?
what is.
Yeah.
People, individuals, will try to put some sense of morality, attach some sense of morality to it.
Correct. Correct. And
But
that's attachment. Right.
that's not how it should be, in my opinion.
And it can get in the way. Those very much get in the way of our understanding of what's going on.
Right. And
Usually.
I mean, it's just like, for instance, TFM has his stuff, and he fully and outwardly says this is not a red pill thing. This is my personal thing.
Sure.
But unfortunately, some people, try to attach, labels and say that the red pill is about sex dolls or, whatever, and insert, usually something negative to the red pill, and that's usually the people who are critical of it, anyways.
Well, there are a lot of people that have a lot invested in various ideologies and institutions. And so they're going to react very negatively to anything which is self-evidently true but goes against the presuppositions of their ideology or institution.
And their ego, of course.
And their ego, right. Well, people tend to identify those things with their ego. They tend to identify themselves as an element within a structure rather than as an element imprisoned within a structure, although that's not how they would put it. Status hierarchies are very much like little prisons. If your identity is incumbent on your status in your status hierarchy, then are you really free?
No, you're a slave to trying to maintain your status or your place in the hierarchy, or even
You want to become a high value man,
raise it.
right? High value man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. There's not now, that is not to say there's anything wrong with doing that.
Well, there's nothing wrong with self-improvement.
No. But if we're going to talk about what is, we're going to talk about freedom, then we have to talk about this stuff. And I'm not criticizing that. Status hierarchies exist. But that's where Buddhism comes in and says, but don't take them too seriously, because it's all a game. It's none of it's real. It's all just projections onto the universe. And so don't take it so seriously. And that's really one of the ways you can kind of start waking up is when you realize that a lot of these institutions and structures and religions and ideologies are all taking themselves far too seriously. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So yeah. So and when I say seriously, I don't mean that they're not important to you as a human being. I mean, they have no intrinsic value. Their only value is relative to your condition. But there's no inherent or intrinsic value to these things. And that's what I mean by taking things too seriously is. Because what happens is you get bound up in ideas rather than what's really in front of you. And you forget to live.
Yeah, which is, why I do things the way that I do. A lot of people don't understand why, I just laugh at some of this dumb shit or, point and laugh at people who I believe deserve to be pointed and laughed at. They think there's something wrong with it, or that I shouldn't even waste my time doing that. But it keeps me from being angry. And I'm not one of those guys who's incapable of being serious. And as you well know, I can be very serious depending on the subject matter. But
sure,
if you take, as you were talking about earlier, if you take things too seriously, it's just going to harm you at the end of the day.
Yes, it will. Because you're probably wrong about something very important. And if you take things too far, that wrongness will become magnified.
Yeah, as we were discussing that sort of thing offline before we started the stream, but exactly, if you can't stand that you made a mistake or you failed or something like that, and there are personality types who will beat themselves up over something like that.
Sure.
that's not good for you, not good for your physical or your mental health. Uh,
No.
some people are, they'll punish themselves in a way.
Oh, yeah. No, I used to do that. I mean, like I said, I was raised Catholic, so
Mhm.
you can imagine the guilt and shame that was projected on me as a child whenever I would do something quote unquote wrong. Um, it persists, you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
but you're right. When you realize that failure is a learning opportunity, um, that failure reveals to you something about the universe that you didn't know. Now you know it. Now maybe you can avoid it. Or maybe you've discovered that in this failure that there's nothing you can do but to avoid that particular failure. And so you have to change what you want to do entirely. But either way, um, even failure, I mean, if you think about the word failure, it just means to not I mean, it's essentially falling short. Like you're not hitting the target. And well, isn't that what practice is for? Isn't that why you're supposed to keep trying and practicing? And so why do people take failure so seriously? Um, and it's not just people who are failing that take it seriously, it's societies that take it far too seriously. Especially if it goes against whatever it is their prescriptions are, you know?
right, exactly.
So,
So speaking of prescriptions, I think we're getting close to 30 minutes in, and I kind
okay.
of want to start talking about. There are probably a lot of Buddhist lessons that are applicable to what we're about to talk about, and that's partially what you're here for. We're going to talk about the red pill grief cycle
Hmm.
as written by the monkey,
Hmm.
and I thought it was some of his best work, to be quite honest.
I would agree. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to ask you if there are anything in Buddhism that can help someone when they're in this part of the cycle.
Hmm.
Um, and with that said, let's begin. So he begins his grief cycle with the denial phase, or in denial, and some of the symptoms of that, he says, are avoidance, confusion, shock, and fear. So is there anything in Buddhism that can help someone in this part?
Well, the first thing is that there's nothing wrong with having those emotions. Feeling shocked, feeling upset, that's all normal. The A Buddhist perspective on this would be, don't let those emotions dictate your thoughts about what has just occurred. In other words, don't mistake your emotions for the causes. And so when you're going through denial or avoidance, it's hard to deal with denial because, of course, that's an active process, right? It's not as if I can go up to and you need someone's help, basically, to get through it, or you need to be aware enough to kind of trip over the fact that you're in denial. And
Well,
either way, the basic help that Buddhism can give you with that is to give you a center, to give you um, the practice of something like the practice of meditation, to at least give you an anchor. And what that will do is it'll let the emotions revolve around your new center, and you won't be as affected by them.
hmm,
Like you'll be able to deal with them. You'll be able to you'll be able to feel them properly rather than avoiding them. Because really, the denial and the avoidance is because we want to avoid feeling sad. We want to avoid feeling the next part of the cycle, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to deal when you're in it, if you're in this, the best thing to do is to find a good meditation. I'm afraid that's going to be my prescription for most of this.
Well,
But find a good meditation practice and do it twice a day, in the morning and at night.
I think, okay, that sounds good. We'll get into meditation
Right.
after this, and you can talk about different recommendations you have
Sure.
for meditation
Sure.
and possibly sources. So I
In other words,
say,
the best thing is to get help. Get help from someone who's not in denial, and
right.
work through it, and let your emotions happen. Don't repress them.
The only problem you say when you say get help, the problem is that when you first get red pilled or just being red pilled in general, it's kind of rare. I mean, I can tell you from my personal experience, there really wasn't anyone anyone. It was just, people online talking about it. No one in my personal life could help me, and all they did was give you the usual blue pill bullshit.
Correct.
So
Right.
for me, there was no help, and which is not to say that's the case for everybody, but it's difficult. It's difficult
Yeah, it is. It is because
I feel for people in that stage.
yeah, society is arrayed against this realization. Um, so yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm reluctant to. I mean, I would say I've said this before, and that is, if you're really up against it, to join a Zen group, because a real Zen group, and practice discipline, because that will at least give you, like, if you feel like everything's falling apart and you don't know what to do, forget about everything else. What that will do is give you a non-judgmental structure around which to structure your life. Because Zen is pretty bereft of moral pronouncements. So Zen is one place you can go to. It's harder with other branches of Buddhism because they're more culturally specific, but Zen is a little bit less so. So I guess if I was going to make a general recommendation, that would be it. Go after a Zen group and try and get help, not for what you just realized, but for your condition.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, just help in general, but it's not
Structure.
necessarily going to be red pill help.
No, probably
Gotcha. Gotcha. All right, so let's move on to the next one. And this is the worst one, man. I could talk about this one for a while, but we only got 2 hours here, so or
Yeah.
at the most. So the red pill rage, the
Ah,
infamous one. Symptoms being frustration, anxiety, anger, and of course rage. Now I have my own opinions on what actually causes the rage. Obviously, to me, it's realizing society lied to you. That you've been lied to your whole life about how things work. I
yeah.
get that part.
Yep.
But I also think that there's another element, and that element is that guys, they they wish that their blue pill fantasies were real, and they're angry and frustrated that they
Yeah.
can't have those, rather than the acceptance. Real names not given earlier in the chat. He said, "Accept your feelings and let go of them," and that's the problem. I'll highlight you. And that's the problem that the red pill ragers struggle with. And I've always said that if you've been in this game for, a certain period of time and you're still in red pill rage, something's wrong with you. You need to see like real help.
Yeah.
You
Um,
have to let it go.
it's you have to move past it. Like it, and the only way to move past it is to stop. See, the thing about it is, I mean, I think that part of the reason some people get stuck in this is because they actually feel something.
Yes.
Um, whereas before this, their emotions were a mess. But all of a sudden, they have a focus in this emotion, and it's a sort of anger that feels righteous and justified, and it feels like they're on the right side of something for the first time in their lives, and so they hold on to it. And I get that. We've seen this before in other contexts, in religious contexts, and other contexts where people hold on to these sorts of things because it gives them a sense of being alive, a sense of power,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I can tell you, if you knew me from, 15 years ago, you'd understand I'm a completely different person. So I understand the meaning of rage and what it does, and that
Yes.
whole making you feel alive. Trust me on that, guys. Like, all right, if you knew me 15 years ago, I'm a totally different person, and it's because I'm older, wiser, and have a deeper understanding that I'm a lot more mellow. Because 15 years ago, I would have paid visits to a couple of cities like Seattle and Orlando, or taking a flight to Brazil. But now I'm a totally different person, and all I do is point and laugh. Okay,
Yep.
that doesn't mean I can't be pushed, but it's not likely. It's not likely that I'll ever be pushed to that. I'd rather just point and laugh because people are idiots and they deserve it.
Mhm.
That's all they really need, is to be laughed at and humiliated. But by the way, welcome, plumber. Good to have you.
So how
Um,
do you get, so as far as the rage, this is actually, so we can look at this as anger or aversion. We can sort of
yeah.
essentially we're angry that we're not getting what we want.
Mm.
I think I can sort of
Now, when you say
encapsulate
aversion,
it.
when you use the term aversion, do you mean like focusing on the anger so they don't have to feel a certain other emotion?
Right. I
Okay.
mean, well, not only that, it's a little more than that.
Okay.
So when you're in this rage, you're you're not actively dealing with, again, with the causes. You're reacting to things, and so you get caught up in that. Your aversion in this case is going to be something like aversion to the consequences of the realization.
Hmm.
So you stay in the rage. And I know what the next section is, and it's going to be obvious why you'd want to avoid that. So it's aversion to moving on to the next state, to the next level
Right.
of emotional growth.
So, is there any lessons in Buddhism, or is it?
As far as anger,
Yeah.
um, oh, many.
Just
um,
just name a few.
anger is one of the things. I mean, anger is considered. It's called. It's often in the Pali tradition. It's referred to as. It's called. It's doha. which is like a word that encompasses anger and aversion at the same time, and as a quote unquote unwholesome root. And sometimes those are referred to as the three poisons, or one of the three. It's referred to as a poison. Anger and aversion are often, because anger is, in some sense, aversion.
Mm.
So there's a lot written about dealing with anger, because it's considered one of the roots of the difficulty with achieving wholeness. And the thing about it is, one thing I want to emphasize, the emotion isn't the problem. The emotion itself is never the problem. It's the thoughts, it's how we interact with it, typically, that creates a problem. You can be angry and it can be wholesome.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? And
It's
because you're
normal to be angry, to feel angry at times.
correct.
Sometimes, society likes to tell you, oh, you shouldn't be angry. No, it's normal. Yeah,
Perfectly normal. And the thing is what do you do with it? And how do you...
That's also, major factor.
Right. And the problem isn't so much, when you look at the commentaries on these things, you find out that this is what they're saying. They're not saying the emotions are bad. They're saying that the typical consequences of the emotion are bad.
Yeah,
So,
I know it's cliche, but sounds like the Marcus Aurelius quote. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger as opposed to the causes of it. Or I'm
yeah.
paraphrasing, but you get the idea.
And Stoics don't deny emotion. That's another common misconception. Stoics just say you shouldn't allow your emotions to control your thoughts. But that's all, and your actions. That's what Stoicism is. In some sense, it's a similar path as Buddhism, if you understand it. It's not about being emotionless or being neutral or always striving forward. It's about not being affected by your emotions in any substantive way other than the emotions themselves. Because if you don't express them, you're just repressing them, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you can't bottle. That's another lesson. Don't bottle that shit up.
No, let it go. Let it. When you say let it go, in Buddhism they say let it go, right? But we're not saying let it go like let it go away. Let it go. Let it go. Let it do its thing.
Yeah.
Let it.
Experience it.
Experience it.
Yeah.
It's what's happening to you right now, and it's real. Experience it. So that's what let it go means. It's not so much detaching yourself from it. It's allowing it to take place without engaging in that usual process of covetousness or craving or clinging, because the emotion makes you feel something that you want to continue feeling.
We can get into that. We've had discussions about certain pill colors that just cling to the emotion and indignation that they feel, but that's not what we're streaming about,
right?
So we're not going to get into that.
Right. So that's what I would say about anger is don't try and cool it. Actually sit in it really hard. Like actually look at it, feel it, let it be there. If you have to, find a rubber room and beat the shit out of stuff. Really lean the fuck into it and let it. Just don't cling to it. Don't say I need this,
because don't get too crazy.
No, because if you cling to it, you're not gonna. Here's the other problem. If you cling to an emotion, if you want to experience an emotion, it's harder to experience it fully. I know that sounds weird, but I think people can identify with The moments when emotions have seemed the most real are the moments when you weren't expecting something to happen. Like when you had a feeling of infatuation or a feeling of amazement, or you ate something that was sublimely delicious. It just happened, right? And when it happened, it was full. It was a full experience.
Yeah, especially if it's, on that topic. Like if it's something you initially thought was fucking gross, but you're like, fuck it, I'll try it. And then it turns out to be delicious.
Mhm.
You know, that's a good experience. But we're getting ready to move on. But I wanted to bring this up. Plumber, red pill rage to me was realizing that I should have figured it out myself. I was more mad at myself than anything else. That was part of it for me too. I'm like, can't
Yeah,
believe I didn't fucking see this. It's like if you get scammed or you fall for an
right.
obvious fucking trick, and then you walk away and you think about it and you're like, shit, they got me. That was part of it, but there was a lot more to it for myself than just that. That was just one element of the entire thing for
Well,
me.
this goes back to what we were talking about with failure, though.
Yes, it does. There's definitely a tie to that.
It's okay. I mean, it's okay that you missed it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I that's how I am. Beat myself up a little bit and then I let it go. It's over. Nothing I can do about it. I'll just, for me, I just make sure I don't do that next time. Make sure I pay more attention or, you know, different things, but I've learned from the experience. So
That can be taken too far.
yes. Yeah.
And so that's, it's one of the reasons that the method is called the middle way. So you really don't want to. The only reason to say that to yourself, why didn't I see that before, isn't in a blame sense, it's in an actual question. In other words, why didn't I see that? And if you ask yourself gently, you'll learn a lot more than if you ask yourself harshly.
Yeah.
Because you'll see things about how you were conditioned, the world, your own beliefs, all the things which contributed to you missing something. You'll actually see them. So ask yourself gently.
All
Don't
right,
be so hard
man.
on yourself.
With that said, we're going to get into one of the more rougher ones. And this is in the middle of the grief cycle.
Right,
And this is the valley of suicide.
right.
And emotions, he says, are tied to this: overwhelmed, loss of hope,
Mhm.
helplessness, fight or flight, pain.
Resignation, really.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is probably when those chemicals are really, those stress chemicals are really pumping, you know, and you're probably thinking a lot about everything that happened to you. Now that the rage has cooled off and you're just left to think.
mhm.
So, what do you have to say about all that?
What Buddhism has to say about this kind of thing, there's two things. I think it was Camus who said the only serious philosophical question is whether or not to commit suicide.
Hmm.
So this isn't a new state. People have reached that state for many other reasons. Um, and this reason is a little different, but it's similar. Um, and it is a serious question. What's the point? That's what we're talking about, is the area of the graph that says what's the point? What's the point of going on?
Hmm.
There's nothing stopping you from doing it. And that's the thing that can release you. You have to understand, first of all, that you can do whatever you want. And if you do commit suicide, you won't suffer any consequences except for the fact that you're not here anymore. But here's the other problem. We're all dumb, stupid, and ignorant. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The sun rises every day. And just because you feel spent and hopeless today doesn't mean that something won't make itself known to you tomorrow that changes that. So, what you would have done by checking out is getting rid of all the potential futures that you could have had that, in some sense, are guaranteed to have had good moments in it.
Yeah.
So you're throwing away with that feeling. You're throwing, if you actually do something bad to yourself, you're throwing away the baby with the bathwater. The feeling of hopelessness is an illusion. It's exhaustion. It's emotional exhaustion, really. And it's understanding, well, what can I do? It's what can I do? Well, there's never been anything you can do. There's never been anything anyone can do. The universe is what it is. And when you're in this state, in Buddhism, this is actually a kind of precious state because you can go one way or the other. If you surrender in the right way, it'll lead you to understanding and knowledge.
Hmm.
And that's really where you want to go with this. You can feel incredibly hopeless and down. But to be honest, you can probably, regardless of how bad you feel, I am nearly certain that any one of us could imagine people who had it far worse off than we do right now, regardless.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
yeah.
just looking at that spectrum was enough for me to say to myself, this feeling of hopelessness, this feeling of difficulty, it's telling me something. It's telling me that I'm spent. Because you just went through the rage, didn't you? So you spent yourself on the rage and now you feel hopeless. Why do you feel hopeless? Because you're no longer feeling like you're enraged. But if you don't get through this feeling of exhaustion, it's really exhaustion. It's really emotional exhaustion. Then
Yeah.
you'll never know what it's like to have beat it, you know?
Right.
So that feeling, I mean, I've had that feeling before, and I mean, I've dealt with it any number of ways, but usually what I do is, well, I definitely make sure that I eat right and I get a lot of sleep. Like, that's one of the reasons that I said it's useful to get into a discipline of some kind whenever you're going through this, because it'll give you all the tools you need to get through it without you having to really do anything. So I made sure that I ate right and slept right and stayed away from talking about it. I just let myself be until I started feeling better. And it always happened. I've been through this several times in my life, and it always is the same. You go down, you're there for a little while, you know, you take care of yourself, and then you come back out.
Yeah. And I've always had the philosophy of, like, you know, as long as you're alive, things can change.
Yes.
But once you make that decision, it's over and there's no taking it back.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I
It
can
doesn't make sense.
definitely.
I mean, why would you want to check out, actually? Because look, I mean, I know why, because of the feeling. This feels so hopeless and bad. Why do I want to feel this anymore? But you're feeling something. Like, that feeling of emptiness is a feeling. And it's your mind that's telling you that it's time to go. Your body isn't doing that. That's your mind.
Yeah.
And so just, if you have no one to lean on, it's the find you need to have a friend to lean on when you're going through this, or at least have a discipline to lean on, because that will get you through it very handily. And I'm really trying not to make light of this because it's really hard.
No.
I know how hard it is.
No, yeah, we both
Um,
probably been through this. Like I recall, I'll never forget, when I've never been suicidal, but I've been, because number one, my faith, and I just have the philosophy, I cannot self-terminate.
sure.
But I remember the going through a similar phase where I kind of was just existed, I had no energy. I could barely, you know, I'd drag my ass up
Yep.
to go to work,
Yep.
and I'd somehow get through work, and but I just wasn't there. And I think
Yep.
even my coworkers noticed the
Yep.
change in me as well.
Yep.
And then just you know, one day I just snapped out of it, and I was back to being me again.
It can take some time, but
Yep.
yeah, that's how it works.
Oh boy. I
It's
think
it's
that's
it's what it is. I mean, the it all depends on your personal circumstances. I've done things like I've used psychedelics to help me with things like that. Um, I've used
oh
music.
boy. Yeah.
Music can help, and I don't mean like angry music. I mean like beautiful music.
Hmm.
Whatever you find beautiful. Um, what probably doesn't, I'm sure alcohol doesn't help. Alcohol will keep you
No.
there. That'll
Nope.
keep you there longer. Um, because alcohol prevents you from feeling it. So it's just numbing you to it. Rather than letting you work through it, it's preventing it.
Yep. It's a very, as they use these days, the word cope, and it
Yeah.
doesn't do a very good job of that.
No.
In fact, it makes things worse. Always has.
Hmm.
So I think we've talked quite a bit about that one. I just want to, before we move on, I want to address a comment in the chat. He says, righteous anger should be feared by the wicked. They have every reason to fear righteous wrath, and rightfully so. Yeah, I can relate to that. I have those who know me well know I have a very justice-based morality. So
Well,
I get where you're coming from.
yeah. Well, wrath isn't the same thing as anger.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
true also.
it's often confused with it. Wrath is only appropriate if you're not angry while you're executing it. I mean, you can be righteously angry, meaning your anger is justified.
Yeah.
But if you act while you're angry, you're going to do something wrong every time. You have to not be in the thrall of anger in order to. If you're going to be wrathful, you can't be angry, because otherwise you will fuck up. Being wrathful is very much like, well, I guess I could make the analogy of, if you can imagine a sniper. A sniper is a great example of a perfectly wrathful being. But the sniper probably doesn't feel a lot of emotions while he's doing what he's doing, right?
Well, yeah. You in that context, you learn to turn that off.
Correct. It's the only way to do the correct thing. And in the same way, if you are angry, you can't do anything wrathful because you will do the wrong thing.
Or you overdo it for sure.
Or, oh, yeah, of course. Anyway,
Well, I'll let you refute that comment later.
No, I mean he's right. It's just
Well,
that
no, there's another
it's
one. I'm
there's a
talking about a
distinction.
different comment, man.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I'll- we're gonna move on to this one. Will probably be short because we're on the up. We're going up in the grief cycle, and
Okay.
he's talking about brotherhood, which is something
Hmm.
you and I were talking about earlier. But with the brotherhood stage, this is the healing, emotional healing,
Yes.
finding meaning, reaching out, talking to
Yeah.
people, learning and sharing,
Hmm.
uh, which is, as I said, positive, a lot of positivity. I think you're on the upswing.
Hmm.
So you want to talk about brotherhood when it comes, because we were talking about this earlier again. You want to talk about brotherhood in regards to, you Buddhism.
Well, in Buddha, they have this idea called the three jewels: the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The Sangha is sort of loosely translated as community, but you could translate it as brotherhood. Um, it's basically, your crew, the crew of people that are all doing this crazy thing all together and leaning on each other for support. Um, in Buddhism, it's considered very important that you have support because what you're doing by exposing reality to your naked eyes is you're removing all of the stone from under your feet while you're doing that. And so you need some support while you're doing that, otherwise, you'll drown in the sea that you've created because you have to dissolve that stone before you can build anew. Um, so the support is really important because as you progress, you'll lose your tools and your views and your understandings. Will everything starts to get disproven. Everything kind of starts to go away, and they start getting replaced with new understandings. And so you need support during that time. That's why brotherhood is important. You want to reach out and try and get support um, from other people who are going through something like what you're going through. I mean, it's a lot of the reason why AA does what it does, right?
Yeah.
It's a very similar reason. Um, if you've been in a room with people who all have the same purpose and are all very devoted to it, the feeling in the room is much different. You kind of almost feel buoyed up by the mutual support of people just being in the room with you. So it's important, yeah. And I think once you lose the hopelessness, that's what you start looking for is, okay, who else out there has gone through this? And then you start reaching out for people to associate with that can have some understanding of what you just realized. Because it's hard to talk about this stuff with people who haven't been through it. How do you describe a sunrise to someone who's never seen the sun? You can't. So you need to find like-minded people.
Yeah, and I've always talked about my experience. I mean, the reason why I even ran into most of you guys in the first place was because I didn't know, after my red pill awakening and everything, I didn't know where to find people who had a
Yeah.
similar outlook to me. So I ended up hanging out with the MGTOW guys, which was
Yeah.
an interesting experience, and that's how I met you and
Yeah.
Plumber and all these other guys. I would have never met you if that hadn't happened.
That's true. Yeah.
Uh,
And I mean, that's why I went too. That's why I got involved was because, well, it seemed like these guys are talking about some of the stuff that I'm going through. So, well, okay, let's talk. And it was the first time I'd been able to talk with candor about a lot of different things. So,
yeah, and Yeah, I mean, I didn't know anything about like So Suave and the So Suave forum, and I think I might have encountered at the time like Return of Kings, but it was like a bunch of guys on there like, you must be the alpha wolf,
Yeah,
silverback gorilla,
yeah.
Spartan king, and it's like these guys are little, I don't know, I don't know what to think of these guys because they're little too hardcore for my taste as well. I'm usually pretty damn laid back,
Well,
but
the people who give you formulas, probably you don't want to go for that.
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
Buddhist perspective. The Buddhist perspective is fuck formulas. Methods are good, but formulas, that is to say, guides to action, are not so good. If you need them, then the ones that some Buddhist sects have created are pretty much not going to hurt you. So if you need a guide to action, you can look at various Buddhist sects and say to yourself which one vibes most with me, and then use those. But they're not the point. Guides to action aren't the point of it. So, yeah. If people are giving you guides to action, like you got to do this or you got to do that, they're probably not. Yeah, they probably don't know what they're talking about.
yeah. I guess that's fake Luigi in the chat again.
I mean,
Anyhow,
Kevin Samuels is a great example. He's not. I mean, now again, his method could work for some men. Let me back up. His method could work for some men. My point is, his method and his approach isn't for all men. It's for men who vibe to that approach. And they have to understand the strengths and weaknesses of that approach.
hmm,
So there's bullshit in every approach. You have to know where it is and avoid it. That's it. That's really my point. No approach is perfect. All approaches have some merit if they've been created with some sense of, without a sense of trying to manipulate an audience into being pay piggies.
yes, yeah,
um,
the grift.
right. If the method has been created as an outgrowth of personal experience and in an effort to genuinely help other people, and you're interested in making money by helping people with that method, that's fine. As long as the origin of the method is from a good place, if that makes sense. So you might vibe with Kevin Samuel's method, you might not. You might look at Zazen and say, or you might look at, Soto Zen and say, that's the way for me.
Hmm.
You might look at Catholicism and say, that's the way. The point is, never get lost in the rules. Always remember that the rules are just a game. They're a way for you not to have to think about the structure that you're inhabiting, so that it frees you up to live and to learn. That's really it.
All right, I think we've covered this one pretty well.
Okay.
So last but definitely not least, he says the self-actualization phase. And that's male sovereignty, individual worth, internal validation, new plans / dreams, moving forward, which is stuff that I like to talk about. Did a few videos about this stuff, that were meant to be food for thought. So, what you got for me?
Well, self-actualization is another way of saying enlightenment.
Hmm.
In
Yeah.
Buddhism, you'd call it that enlightenment, but you'd call the process of getting there, your first flash of self-actualization is, well, they call it a lot of things, but you can get flashes of self-actualization without living in it, if that makes sense. And then ultimately, the flashes essentially last longer until they stick. So self-actualization isn't a one and done thing. That last piece, self-actualization, is actually all its own. It's its own. You could take that piece and turn it into its own graph.
Hmm.
Internal validation is one that I have a hard time with, because not that you shouldn't evaluate the world and yourself and your place in it on your own, with your own merits. But the word validation, it implies an other. And so it's, for me, I guess I just don't like how it's phrased, but that's just me. I would rather think of this as acceptance of, like, letting go of the nasty voice that's constantly fucking with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
See, it's not so much internal validation as it is getting rid of the nasty voice. Once the nasty voice goes away, you feel a lot better.
Once you stop really giving a shit about what people think of you, I mean, I think that's ultimately what it's getting at.
Well, yes, but you should also give a shit, like, because you could be wrong about something. So the sense of it is, I think, more like an acceptance of your individual,
Oh, yeah.
presence in the, like, essentially you're accepting, you're not excessively worried
Right.
about any external, validation or stimuli or whatever. You're mostly moving forward based on your own perceived, um, feelings, emotions, and goals. And that's why this is its own graph, because really the process of self-actualization is essentially Buddhism. Um, that's what being awake means, right? Um, so I would say that that's, if I was to comment on that last bit, that would just be, well, he's talking about, that is Buddhism. It's its own kind of Buddhism. It's just, he's using, I actually forget the author who created the idea of self-actualization. It may have been Maslow, but in any event, this is the same thing as enlightenment. Full self-actualization would be like becoming a Buddha. It's the same thing. So that's how Buddhism relates to self-actualization. That's what it is. Becoming a Buddha is being fully and permanently self-actualized. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does. Yeah, and I think you mentioned TFM. I mean, he's dabbled. I think he even wrote a book about, was it Taoism or Taoism? He's been highly interested in Eastern philosophy, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Has other creators like Rushdi, before he graduated to the God pill, he was very interested in Taoism as well, and even Stoicism, and he tried about everything before he came to the God pill.
Well, he wanted to, I mean, if what you want to learn is the secrets of the universe, then practice Buddhism or Taoism with devotion. If, however, you want to be a member of a group and feel better about your life, then do something else. Because not because you can't do those things within Buddhism or Taoism, but because if you're earnest, you'll find out that the more you practice, the less satisfied you become, and you become committed to having something happen. And unlike joining a religious faith, which is an entirely different experience. So if what you want is to be just to feel like you're part of a group and all those sorts of things, to feel belonging and inclusion, Buddhism may not be for you. Because it might be. There are sects of Buddhism that promote it, by the way. There's probably, there's Pure Land Buddhism. There's a number of types of Buddhism that actually promote this kind of thing. They're for lay people, right? But if you really want to know, if you really want to know things, you want to figure all this shit out.
All right. Do you want to address the chat?
Of course.
Okay. So this is probably a fake Luigi troll, but do you have a response to these shenanigans?
What in particular?
It's on the screen. He's saying,
I see.
Yeah.
No, I never said that. This is nonsense.
Yeah.
I never said that. I said, if you want to learn the secrets of the universe, then Buddhism or Taoism or something like that, practicing it with devotion is the way to go. You can do the same thing with Christian mysticism. The problem is that there aren't a lot of organizations that actually do that. You can do the same with Jewish mysticism. You can do the same with Sufism. It's all possible. It's all this. But what I said was joining a religious faith. And it's nothing to do. No, I did not. You have to understand the difference between, again, there are only so many words in the English language for me to describe this stuff, and most of it is indescribable. So, in some sense, all religions have something, some connection to the mystical truth, if you want to call it that. But it's just that Buddhism and Taoism are more upfront about the fact that when you practice them, that's your reason for being there. Whereas with other religions, they tend to not do that. They tend to say your reason for being there is to behave this way and to believe this and to do that. So you rarely get any kind of mysticism from most of the larger faiths. That's all.
All right. Let me clear something up too, because he's talking about you subtly laughed at Rush when he was brought up as being a Christian. Now, Apoc does not have any problem with people who are Christians. Her buddy here, Plumber, he's Catholic. Myself, subscribe to the Christian faith.
You don't know what I'm. Okay, can I just let me. Okay, look, I'm not sure where you're getting this from, but I never said any of that, and I just tried to clarify what it is that I said.
I think he's just a troll. There's a fake. He's based off of the guy in the, I don't know what part of the red pill he's from, but his name is Luigi, and he could be just a black pill guy imitating him. I don't know. Maybe it's even the real one. I haven't looked, but he's just trying to stir stuff up at the end of the day.
I don't mind.
But I wanted to clear that up. We're not laughing at Rush.
No.
For the God pill thing, although it is weird. Some people see it.
No,
I myself couldn't care less.
The reason I did that. Well, no, I know what he's talking about, and I can tell you exactly why I had that reaction. It's because I think Rush is lost, very lost, and he's trying to find something to hook onto. And very often, people who say that, no, I didn't say Christianity doesn't have it. I said Christian mysticism exists and is as valid as Buddhism just nobody practices it. Go to a Presbyterian church and say, I want to come into union with God. I want to be Jesus. I want to find the meaning of the Trinity, and see what they tell you. This is the problem. I'm talking about the cultural tradition, not the religion itself. Christianity is beautiful. In fact, earlier today, I was just saying to Rifle that if there was a authentic Western Buddhism, which I don't think there is, it would look a lot like Christianity. I'm just telling you my opinion. You can disagree with me, that's fine. I didn't say it was superior. Look, you're putting words in my mouth, so okay, that you can do that. But no, I'm not. No, this is ridiculous.
Okay. All right, let's move on.
If you're not willing to engage honestly, then don't engage.
All right, so we got a question from Plumber. He says, when I was a young man, I read 2 books by the same author, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior and The Journey of the Peaceful Warrior. Has Apoc ever heard of them?
I've heard of them. I haven't read them.
I guess that answers that. So with that said, let's talk about, we had planned on talking a little bit about meditation.
Yes.
So give us a crash course on meditation real quick.
I can't.
All right, hang on. Got another question before we do that. What are your thoughts on Hermeticism?
He's talking about Hermeticism. So, which is an occult practice. It comes out of the Zohar, and other traditions also use it. My thoughts on it? That's a big question. I mean, it's interesting because Hermeticism uses all sorts of weird systems like geomancy, and it's essentially about patterns and symbols as they arise from nature through the mind of man. And the idea is that you can decode those patterns and find some mystical truth within them. I find it interesting and fascinating. And I learned about it a long time ago and haven't actually practiced it as a discipline. So I only know about it. I haven't done it. But it's very old. It comes from Hermes Trismegistus, which is the union of Hermes and Thoth way back in the day, into a single figure. It's also the origin of the caduceus. So, I mean, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating tradition. I don't know if it's a method as much as if it's a study. Does that make sense? That's my perspective. I don't know enough about it. Right. But, well, we don't know that they actually exist, so the Emerald Tablets.
Yeah, you guys are getting into something I don't know fuck all about.
That's all mystical. Yeah, it's yes. It's, like I said, it's an interesting thing. I would say it's more of a pure mysticism rather than a method to attain realization. Does that make sense? That would be my evaluation.
All right. So rather than
no, I don't believe in that.
Oh, God. All right. So
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, he's a character. So here's the question from Plumber. Do Eastern religions recognize an evil spirit, what we would call Satan, Watiki, or Jinn?
Depends on what you mean by Satan. See, Satan is the adversary, as in the prosecuting attorney. And there's a whole history behind that.
Yeah, we might have to do a whole
But
different stream about
is
religion.
there some kind of deification of, well, first of all, there isn't really a deification of evil in the Bible. If you really look at it, there's no deification of quote unquote evil. Not really. But um, that being said, um, there's plenty of things in Eastern. I mean, depends on what you mean by evil. If you mean a supernatural force, then no, not in most Eastern. Nothing coming out of Buddhism, anyway. Um, and there's always a kind of twist. Like negative can also be positive. Like if you look at, say, if you look at Hinduism and you think about Kali, right? This is a symbol I'm sure many people are familiar with. Kali, if you want to look up images of Kali. Kali is a negative is thought of as a negative symbol. In fact, there was a whole cult around Kali called the Thuggee cult. It's thought to be the origin of the word thug, actually. And they were violent and nasty and brutal and all that. So, but Kali also is the destroyer of delusion, which is a good thing. And wrathful beings are thought of in Eastern philosophy as being dangerous, but when encountered properly are really handy because they're the ones that are going to be able to kick ass when you need them to. Does that make sense? But what you want on your side when the shit's hitting the fan is not a goody two shoe, essentially. So that's kind of how generally Eastern faiths look at it. It's not really a black and white distinction. It's more about how you interact with them. And that the darker spirits, the quote unquote evil spirits, are actually not inherently evil. They're just dangerous. Like, fire. Used incorrectly, it can hurt or kill you. Does that answer your question, Plummer?
Yeah, this is going to devolve into like if people want to have a religious debate on the channel, I'm fine with that. But right now we're just talking about a I don't know. Would you define Buddhism as a religion or spirituality or a philosophy?
Buddhists don't believe, at the core of Buddhism, there is no belief in the supernatural, no.
Okay.
In fact, there are many priests and Catholics and they're Christians who practice Zen Buddhism as a discipline because it is bereft of any sort of supernatural claims. Buddhism doesn't really have, I mean, Tibetan Buddhism has some of it, but that's why I liked it, because it was similar to Catholicism. I mean, it was a little bit familiar. But at its core, Buddhism makes no supernatural claims. Not really. It's all assumed to be symbolic. If you actually dig, you find out that the wheel of samsara can be looked at as actual places, but if you dig farther, you realize it also refers to states of mind. It's not necessarily supernatural.
Do you mean apocalypse or apocrypha? I'm not sure what he meant here.
Apocalypse it means the revelation of what is hidden.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting. Can we attain enlightenment?
Everyone can attain enlightenment.
Okay. Well, this is God, the mudslinging.
Well, I mean,
you were just talking about Buddhism, but I mean, I think you and I have talked about some interesting, metaphysical stuff. But we're not. I don't think we want to get into that. If you want to have a religious someone wants to have a debate or something, I'm fine with that as long as it doesn't turn it into Jerry Springer or something. But
I'm not. No, I didn't say it was supernatural. I never said it was supernatural. I said mystical. That's different.
you might have to explain the
Luigi,
difference.
I don't know. I'm not
Yes.
sure. I know you. Obviously, you have a thing about Buddhism. That's fine. I'm just relaying what I think is true. You're free to disagree with it and say whatever you like, and people are free to disagree with what I'm saying. That's 100% okay. But please don't misrepresent what it is that I actually said, because you're doing that constantly.
Oh God. We got some. I'm sure we.
No,
got
I
some
never said it was. I said there's no super. I said there is no supernatural element to Buddhism whatsoever. I said some sects of Buddhism incorporate it, yes, but at their core, there is no supernatural anything in Buddhism. All the supernatural stuff is cultural or added on.
Now we got
In
broccoli.
Tibetan Buddhism, it was added on because of their own faith. We don't have time to get into all of this, so that's why
No,
I'm
we
cutting
don't.
it short.
We're fixing to cut this off here in a minute. Does anyone have any more questions? That are no more mudslinging. Does anybody have any questions? That this guy says he smoked something and attained enlightenment.
You can't attain enlightenment by smoking anything.
There we go. There's he disagrees with you there.
No, it's you just can't. I mean, it's not about having a psychedelic experience. Psychedelic experiences are helpful because they give you a sense of what's possible. But you have to have a natural change of state in your mind. There's a fellow who practiced Shingon. He's actually an American who was a member of quote unquote the family, and you can look them up from the 60s. His group produced, as he put it, millions of hits of LSD, and he personally had done it thousands of times. And what he said was he stopped doing it completely because it wasn't helping him anymore. It was just the same thing over and over again. He already knew it was possible, but he never could get there. So psychedelics are useful in showing you what's possible. They won't get you there. You have to do that yourself.
So what you're saying is that when Bruce V smoked all that stuff, that he didn't achieve enlightenment.
No.
Okay. And I like Bruce. I'm just teasing, but
he may have
funny.
What he may have done, I mean, you can have what's called a boomie, which is a brief vision into the truth, but it doesn't change. Those show you what's possible. They're kind of like breadcrumbs along the way. You still have to walk the path,
Oh, there's a good question.
Where to even begin? Wow. I mean, it's very personal. It really depends on what you vibe with. There are many different approaches and sects and completely different sets of cultural beliefs around many different kinds of Buddhism. But in the West, I would say the best place to start is probably Zen. I wouldn't say that book, but Siddhartha isn't a Buddhist book. It's a dramatization by Hermann Hesse of what he thought the Buddha might have gone through.
No,
it's not an introduction into Buddhism.
One more thing. I know you kind of alluded to this, and this will be the last thing before we go, but
sure.
You alluded to this earlier, but you said something about Westerners kind of being confused about Buddhism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, at the core of Buddhism is the Buddha's original prescription, which is the Four Noble Truths. What people don't know about this is that this is what most people in the West don't know, is a couple of things. One of those things is that it's a prescription. It's literally a doctor's prescription. It's the sense of it is that you have a problem. Here's the problem. Here's the cause. Can it be cured? How does it get cured? So the approach is like essentially an Ayurvedic medical approach, right? The big thing people don't know is that the first noble truth you've heard over and over again, life is suffering, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an awful translation of the first noble truth, in my opinion. Some people will say it's a good one, but I think it's awful because the first noble truth is just one word. It's dukkha, which is a Sanskrit word, which there's a lot of debate over what it means. But if you look at it as just a word, it kind of means bitterness. Thich Nhat Hanh is a good introduction. He's not a Zen Buddhist. Thich Nhat Hanh is not a Zen Buddhist. If you want an introduction to Zen Buddhist, I would look into Soto Zen, SOTO Zen, and look up stuff that the original patriarchs wrote, and then go from there.
Oh no, those evil patriarchs.
So SOTO Zen would be a good place to start. Thich Nhat Hanh actually is Mahayana Buddhism, which is different. He's a Thai Buddhist. It's a little different. I think he's Thai. Actually, I could be wrong. He might be Vietnamese. Yes, he's Vietnamese. Anyway, it's a similar path, and it's not Zen.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, sin, since that word was brought up, I think it translates as missed the mark, which doesn't
sin is sineos. Yeah, it literally so the word sin comes from an old Greek archery term, which means to miss the target.
Okay. That's what I thought. Mistakes are made.
I mean, St. Augustine himself, there was a debate on this. And St. Augustine himself said about the Ten Commandments. And to sum it up, he said, no, the Ten Commandments were laid out because it was well known that they were impossible. Especially the first one, the one which says, you are commanded to love me. Think about that. You must love me, but only if you do so voluntarily. That's impossible.
Yeah.
The point of that is to set up a friction inside the practitioner so that they can figure out what was really meant by things. And this is corroborated by many, many scholars, St. Augustine included. So I'm just relaying what they said. Anyway, Zen Buddhism, like I said, I would look up anything with Soto Zen, and I would look up the patriarchs of Soto Zen. I feel like I would butcher his name. But I will try. If you'd like me to.
Yeah, if anyone is interested, I'm a very big on personal freedom, so personal choice in most things. Obviously, non-aggression principle type of stuff. As long as you're not hurting anybody else.
So there is the Soto Zen Buddhist Association based in North America. I would say you'd want to go there. Dogen started it back in 11. Well, Dogen basically brought it to Japan. It originated in China as Ja'an, which was the original Buddhism that came out of India and went to China from a person named Bodhidharma. But yeah, I would say the Soto Zen Buddhist Association looks like it would be a good place to start. Shunryo Suzuki is the guy who was very popular in the 60s. He actually formed a big Zen center in California called Tassajara. So I would look into that association. It's a good place to start. Soto. What is enlightenment? Really? Are you really asking me that? What is
No.
truth? The wisest scholars and people who've thought about this question the most say that there's no way to describe it other than in negative terms. That is to say, you can say what it isn't. In Christian theology, this is called apophatic language, which is also, by the way, in Christian theology, considered the strongest way to describe God, which is in negative language, what God isn't. It's the same thing with enlightenment. It's essentially nothing you can talk about, but in Zen they have a phrase that's put at the end, which essentially translates to "and then not." So you always say "and then not" at the end of any statement. Because although that's the best I can do, it's slightly wrong. There's no way to discuss it because there's no way to describe anything that is real. We can label things, but until you have an enlightenment experience, I can't tell you what it is. It would be like me, like I said, describing a sunrise without you ever having seen the sun. There'd be no way for me to explain it or for you to understand unless you saw it yourself. So enlightenment is the best thing I can do is to say it's a shift in your point of view about how things relate to you as a human being. And it puts an end to a large amount of needless stress that your mind is constantly generating for yourself. And that's the best way I can put it in positive terms. Not all Buddhists are vegetarians as well.
Okay. So Plumber's got a question. Would enlightenment be seeing the good, beautiful, and truth?
As much as it's seeing the evil, ugly, and lie.
So it's seeing everything, of course.
Everything. Good can't
Makes
exist
sense.
without evil. Good and evil are on the same spectrum because they're defined in terms of each other. You can't know what good is unless you know what evil is. So for good to exist, evil must exist. For beauty to exist, ugliness must exist. Because everything is a relationship. Everything. Everything is a relationship. Everything we talk about comparatively is a comparison. If you say truth, you imply there are lies. If you say beautiful, you imply there is ugliness. If you say good, you imply there's evil. So it's coming into the union of opposites and seeing that for what it is. That's part of the path.
It's all good, Luigi. Yeah. So he says, so you can't have a beautiful day if you ain't seen a rainy one.
It's even worse than that. If you've only ever seen sunny days, you will begin to describe differences between those sunny days as ugly. It's because it's always a comparison. There's always a comparison. You know, like one of the criticisms, like we could get rid of the racism problem if everyone was just the same race. That's not true. First of all, everyone is the same race. We're the human race. But second of all, if everyone was phenotypically the same, there'd still be small differences. And over time, those differences would become important. And then you'd have the same thing. So It's an enlightenment is kind of like seeing all of that for how it really works.
Hmm.
It's answering the question why. Why? You know. But it's nothing that can be like you're asking me to use language, which is inherently a comparative tool to describe something which has no
Mm.
comparisons in it, right? I mean, it can't be done. That's why it's always a struggle. And I can only talk about what it isn't.
I think you're SMH. I think you're confusing race with species.
Yeah.
That said, I think we're going to wrap it up here, guys. Thank you all for coming. This was
Yeah. Thank you all very
it's a
much.
really good time. And
Are there any other? Are there any other? What time do we have?
We got 15 more minutes if we're going to stop at 2 hours. So if you, yeah, he sounds like he wants to answer any more questions that you guys might have if they're good. So
Particularly about Buddhism. Like I'm
yeah.
not dissing other religions at all, you know?
Okay. Yeah, we know that, but some of these guys don't know you, but like, Plumber, myself, and some of these other guys do know you. But yeah, I can see how, some people who don't know you might think you were doing that. But I wanted to clear that up,
Yeah, I mean,
He's not anti-Christian or anything like that.
Absolutely not.
Right.
No, not at all. I'm against ignorance.
Right.
Good.
I personally don't diss people's religion or lack of religion on this channel. I know some people like to get on their community tab and say certain things, but that's a pretty good question. Canines are interesting, SMH, because while technically wolves and coyotes aren't the same species, they can breed. That's why you get, and coyotes can breed with a domestic dog. That's how you get like the coy dogs and stuff like that. In fact, I think the red wolf, I happen to know a lot about wolves. The red wolf has a lot of coyote DNA. And for whatever reason, because they have a common ancestor, they can interbreed. But technically, they're not the same species.
Real names not given asked, what is the difference between Zen Buddhism and other forms?
Good question.
There are a lot. Zen Buddhism is seen as it depends on the sect, but generally Zen Buddhism is seen as a sort of the barest of the Buddha of the sects. In other words, the one with the least amount of extra stuff. And it's why, I mean, there are Jesuit cardinals and priests that practice Zen Buddhism because it's so bereft of any kind of supernatural claims. There's nothing in it. It's strictly a discipline. So it's essentially thought of as extremely pure form of practice and discipline. That's the main difference. It's also Japanese. It also originates in Japan from a couple of people over time. So it has some Japanese cultural roots, like you're using chopsticks and doing tea ceremonies and all of that, which is all very Japanese and culturally Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
But Western Zen Buddhist masters have, in fact, some of them do, in fact, get rid of all that, and they start wearing things like black t-shirts and jeans, which to them is more appropriate for a Western audience.
Okay. Thoughts on Sanskrit definition
of ego?
Yeah.
You have to give me the word that you're referring to, the Sanskrit word.
Okay, so you got to be more specific. Yeah, you are correct, SMH. And ego is something I've been wanting to do a video on it, but it's kind of hard to collect my thoughts. But it's on the list. I have a list of videos I've been wanting to do before I take a break from the Mano Swamp. This stream right here was on the list, so we're knocking this out.
Mm-hmm. I can actually, I mean, I can speak about the Buddhist idea of ego versus the Western. It's not true, Kaiser. Let me just throw this in. It's not true. It's just that the Eightfold Path isn't quite tooled for women. It's mostly tooled for men, and so women have a harder time with it. But that's a huge. We could have an entire podcast about that.
Yeah.
So the ego in Buddhism, the ego is that it's not anything abstract like a Freudian sense, like some Freudian ego idea. It's thought of as the felt sense of you as living inside of your body and not being of your body. The ego is that thing which you believe is you, is what I is. It's essentially it's what your personality, what you think is your personality, all of your habits and behaviors and all of this as controlled by your ego, by who you are. The sense of being an observer behind your own eyes. That's the Buddhist idea of ego versus the Western misinterpretation, which assumes that it's a built-in part of us, that it's necessary, but it's not. It's a thing that's developed by circumstances, culture, and language, or so Buddhists contend. Women don't. No, it's not that. No, I'm sorry, Greg, but I disagree with you there, and that's why I don't want to get into it, because it's the female. What the female path looks like, I will tell you. I'll give you a quick view. What the feminine path looks like is you start in total isolation, with a difficult discipline to practice. Very simple, but very difficult. And you continue, and you gradually are introduced back into the world over time. So, but with the male side, it's encouraged to be in groups in the path. And the reason for this is that we each have different needs. Women tend to want to be in groups when they feel under stress. Men tend to want to be alone. So Buddhism advises the opposite, so that you can come into tension with opposites and thus have a higher chance of reaching enlightenment. So if women feel they need to be led, they need to be put in a position where they're not being led by anything in order to reach enlightenment. And that's what the Deva path is. It's just not really discussed much because it's run by women and it's kept pretty secret. But we could talk about that for hours.
Yeah, we got to wrap up real soon. So maybe if we get a lot of requests for a part 2, we'll look into it.
Let me see. So is that a good? I just want to ask Jennifer if that was a reasonable explanation. Like if she thought that explanation was okay, because I thought it was an important question that she asked about ego.
Yeah, there's a little latency between, what we say and what they hear.
I know.
No, give her.
That was very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. I try. Okay.
And Jennifer is come over here because Rolo gave me a shout out, which I still appreciate.
Hypatia was interesting. Yeah, Hypatia was interesting. Very interesting. She was, we believe, she was killed by It's possible. We don't know because we only have her scientific writings. But she was killed by. I mean, the canonical story is that she was killed by having her skin flayed off with oyster shells
Wow.
by essentially really bad people. That was when Alexandria was being destroyed by the Bishop of Alexandria, when the Alexandrian library and all the East-West stuff was being destroyed. So Alexandria was amazing. I really wish we had something like it today. We don't. We always get into these arguments about positions, and very rarely do we start to. I mean, back then they would talk about how Christ was a Buddha, and why do you say that? And there'd actually be a conversation. There was a tremendous amount of cross-pollination between East and West in Alexandria. There's even a Hindu temple to Isa, which is thought of as, by the Hindus, as a precursor to Jesus, which is interesting, and that's a whole other story. If you want to go down the rabbit hole, look up Isa, ISSA, Hindu temple, and look up the history of that one. So find a rabbit hole there. It's interesting.
All right, guys. It's been good. We might have to have a part 2. If you guys want a part 2, you know what to do in my comments. Request part 2 in the comments, and we'll see about making it happen. But, if people don't want a part 2, then that's also cool. I hope you all learned something from this. And as always, it's good to have Apoc in the house. People tend to love him. And
I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity.
He's a regular guest, and we like having him on. So thank you all for watching. And like I said, if you want a part 2, let us know in the comments. And with that said, peace out.